One of the most important aspects of owning a trailer is to ensure that all our parts are adequately maintained as time goes by. We are now going to go and have a look at adjusting and replacing bearings in an axle that has been travelling for about 4 years. Tools required are a hammer, chisel, side cutters, suitable spanner for the castle nut, some grease, or even better, a Berquip replacement kit, small screwdriver, some rags. These simple tools will enable us to do the job perfectly. Step number 1 is we need to get the trailer into the air, get the wheel off the ground, and the first step is to actually remove the wheel. Once the wheel is removed, we have the drum exposed. Next part is to actually remove the hub or drum from the axle. This is achieved using a small chisel or a metal bar that you can use to knock the grease cap off, and a hammer. Remove the grease cap. Using the side cutter, remove the cotter pin. Using a suitable spanner, we remove the castle nut. Examine the bearings. This is a bearing that is worn and needs to be replaced. It is important to replace both the cup and the cone of the bearing when the bearings are replaced, and it is also important to replace the inner and outer bearing as a set when maintenance is done. In order to remove the bearing from the drum, there are removal grooves fitted inside the drum. Use a small chisel or a soft metal drift to knock the bearing cap out of the drum. Once the bearing cap and bearing have been removed from the drum, it can be cleaned and inspected as follows. Open up the bearing kit, remove the bearings. Be careful at this stage to make sure that there's no dust and no dirt that can get onto the bearings. Separate the bearing cap from the bearing cone. Take the bearing cap for the inner bearing and using a soft piece of steel or a suitable punch, fit the bearing cup into the hub as shown. The bearing cup is seated all the way home using a suitable small punch or even a pipe that is the right diameter to just fit into the hub and seat the bearing home nicely. You can see it is sitting tight against the seal. Very important. Fit the outer bearing in the same manner. Make sure that the bearing cup is properly seated against the step inside the drum. Adequately grease the bearings as shown. It is very important to note that the grease is rolling through the rollers of the bearing. Remember that all the grease that will ever be in the bearing is being put in at this stage, so be sure to make sure that the bearing is properly lubricated and there are no dry sections. Lubricate the cup. Use a generous smear of grease. Once this is done, the bearing cone can be put into the cup of the bearing. Once this is done, the seal can be fitted. Make sure that the seal is the correct orientation and be very sure that the steel seal is inside the seal itself to ensure that no water can get in. Using a flat piece of metal, gently tap the seal home and make sure it is properly fitted into the cup and level at all points. Once the inner bearing has been finished, repeat the same process for the outer bearing, and once again, we can't stress too much, make sure that all parts are adequately greased. And make sure that there's no dust. Once everything is clean, slide the hub or drum assembly back onto the axle. Fit the spacer washer. Fit the castle nut and using a suitable spanner, tighten the castle nut until the drum is properly seated. You will find that the drum becomes impossible or very difficult to turn. To release the castle nut and spin the drum by hand until it can be easily spun in the forward or the reverse direction. It is very important to note that there should be no play between the nut and the spacer washer, and that there should be no drag on the bearing when you spin the drum forwards or backwards. You will notice that there are 2 holes drilled in the end of the spindle, and there are 6 slots in the castle nut. This combination will allow you to set the preload on the bearing to an accuracy of 0.25 millimeters, which is sufficient for the job at hand. When it is time to fit the split pin, be sure to loosen the hub nut. Fit the pin into the hole. Bend the legs of the pin evenly around the nut. Trim off the excess. Be sure that the excess does not fall into the bearing. Once this is done, the grease cap can be replaced using a suitable punch and hammer. Once this is done, the wheel can be replaced. Be sure to seat the wheel nuts while the wheel is in the air. This is important because if you do not do this, the wheel will come loose. Ensure while the wheel is in the air that there is no play in the nuts and they are properly seated on the wheels. When the trailer has been lowered onto the ground, re-torque the nuts to the correct torque specification. In this case, the torque is 80 Newton meters.